Welcome to another episode of the Voices of the Learning Network podcast. I'm your host today, Bill Banham, and in this episode, we're going to dive into a topic that should matter to every learning professional, and that's accessibility in digital learning. Over the past few years, organizations have made strides in creating more engaging digital learning experiences, but are we truly designing content that everyone can access and benefit from? My guest today has made it her mission to make sure that the answer is yes. Joining me on the show today is Susi Miller, an internationally recognized expert in e-learning accessibility with over 35 years experience in learning and development. Susi is the author of Designing Accessible Learning Content, now in its second edition from Kogan Page, which has become the definitive guide to creating effective and inclusive digital learning. She was recently named the Learning Professional of the Year Gold Winner 2025 by the Learning Performance Institute for her incredible contributions to accessibility, and is also a respected consultant, speaker, and thought leader who has helped global organizations embed accessibility into their learning strategies. Susi, it's my absolute honor to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for that incredible introduction. I'm blown away. Yeah, so
Well,
lovely. Thank you.
you've got an amazing record with lots of awesome achievements. So well done to you. Let's get into the questions.
Okay.
What first opened your eyes to the barriers that many people face when trying to access digital learning, and how did you shape your approach to learning design?
I think probably the kind of the incident that I remember most sort of being the kind of wake up call was when I first started working in digital learning and became an instructional designer. I was working within a local authority, and I think the very first piece of learning that I created using an authoring tool, I put out and had some feedback from people. And I had feedback from someone who used a screen reader and said that the heading levels that I was using in the authoring tool meant that she couldn't navigate using her screen reader. I had absolutely no idea what a screen reader was. I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. But I was really lucky that she let me kind of see her use the screen reader, and it kind of opened up this whole new world. I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I had not even considered that people who had vision access needs would be able to, would want to be, would be able to be looking at my learning content. So I think that was the key moment. And I think for me, what that did was it really, really made me think, actually, I've been designing, as a lot of people do. It's very easy to do for myself. How I think, how I'm learning, and what I need to do is just broaden my, the way that I need to consider other people and the way that they might learn. Equally, also, I found a couple of years ago that I'm dyslexic, so that really has had a big impact on me because it was a light bulb moment, thinking, well, there's a lot of people, who may have access needs that might not even be aware of them. So I think it was just that that shaping the approach, part of the question is really being much more empathetic, much more learner centered, making sure that everything I do is not only adaptable to people that have different access needs, but actually makes it adaptable to people in different circumstances and environments as well. So it kind of really just broadened my perspective, made me a much better designer.
Okay, thank you. Susi, why do you think accessibility is still so often misunderstood in the learning and development space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it probably, for me, kind of it stems from sort of historically how accessibility was seen. So I think, many years ago, certainly when I started, there was a kind of the mindset was, you created a piece of learning content, all bells and whistles, and then you had an accessible alternative, which very much tended to be like a PDF document or a Word document that was the accessible alternative. Now, what that did was create the mindset that actually, we have to have an accessible alternative. We're not able to make the content itself accessible, but also it really kind of had the real detrimental kind of if eventually people were thinking, well, accessibility is strips things out. It means that the learning experience is going to be less of an experience for people who don't have disabilities and access needs. And I think that's the real That's the real kind of, change in mindset that we're still battling with. For me, everything that I've done, everything I've seen, my own practice working with so many different organizations, is that accessibility does lead to innovation. It leads to different ways of thinking. It leads to better learning content for everybody. But that's still, a tough, a tough nut to crack, that one.
Okay, so how can learning designers make accessibility part of the creative process without feeling like they're compromising on quality or interactivity?
Yeah, so I think the kind of like the main thing that I've learned, and my kind of main piece of advice, is just thinking about accessibility up front before you start, not putting it in as an afterthought. So a really fantastic analogy that I use a lot is the blueberry muffin analogy, which we use in accessibility. And the reason I love that analogy so much is because, if you think of a blueberry muffin, it has to be blueberry. Then the blueberries are kind of, when it's cooked, it's all it throughout you've got blueberries throughout the kind of the mixture, and it's kind of delicious. Whereas you can create a blueberry muffin afterwards if you're a designer or a developer. But if you imagine you would have a kind of a muffin and you stick the blueberries in, so it's possible to do. But it's actually not going to produce a great piece of learning experience because you're thinking about it as an afterthought. So not only is it not going to give a great learner experience to people with disabilities and access needs or anyone, but actually it's really time consuming for you. That's what it is that makes accessibility, I think, a constraint and something that actually, hinders creativity. But if you think about it up front, if you have that change of mindset, then it absolutely leads to, you're not doing things because it's the way that you've always done them and it works. You're actually thinking about, okay, is this going to be a good learner experience? Is it something that is going to add value to what I'm doing? So it really does transform the way that you're learning. So I think it's that kind of thinking about it up front. And obviously I think as we discuss a few more questions, we might go into kind of some of the complexities of accessibility, which also, make it easy. It's easy for me to say or think of it up front, but actually what does that mean, think of accessibility up front?
In your experience, Susie, what does it really take to create learning content that is both inclusive and effective across different contexts and tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is that, I suppose a really good starting point for me. Obviously, we'll talk about the standards in a little bit, but a good starting point is just to think about different types of access needs. So if you're thinking about people with, for example, motor access needs, so we've got the four, we've got the vision, the hearing, and the motor and the cognitive. If you just start off with that and you're thinking of how do I make my learning content effective for these, for people who might have these access needs, I think that for me is the best starting point. It then obviously as you kind of like develop that, it then might be more of a focus on, okay, if there's some standards that I need to be aware of, and I need to kind of work out how these standards are benefiting these particular people with these different types of access needs. But I think that's a good starting point for me.
Excellent. We like to offer tangible takeaways for our listeners as well. So,
Good thing.
what's one small change an organization, any organization, could take today, could begin today to start creating more inclusive and impactful learning content?
Yeah, I think that sort of one small step would be, not be. It's very easy because of the standards around accessibility to become overwhelmed and to see it as something that is almost feels too difficult, almost feels something that's scary, and that you kind of it's just too big. So I think for me, it's breaking it down. What I always suggest with organizations who are kind of on this journey is maybe at the beginning starting with, okay, every new piece of learning content that you're going to create, or every new project, maybe have a focus on one particular area. So that could be maybe in this project, we're going to really home down on alternative text. So we make sure that it's accessible for screen reader users. This project, we're going to make sure that our captions are accurate. Easy wins, for example, just being focusing on plain language, which is so important for people with cognitive access needs, neurodivergent people, etc. Things like, is our color contrast, something that I see all the time in the audits that we do all the time. Is our color contrast something that is it meeting the standards, and is it beneficial, which is so beneficial to everybody. It's like not just people who are colorblind or have low vision, but so important for everybody. So yeah, I think that's what I would suggest a good start.
You've touched upon this earlier, I think, but let's delve in a bit more. Accessibility often gets framed as a compliance issue.
Yeah.
How do you encourage organizations to move beyond that kind of mindset around compliance and see it as a driver of innovation and engagement? You said previously the outcomes are innovation,
Yeah. Yeah.
increasing engagement, but how do you get leadership to buy into that?
So I think that's a really interesting question. And I think that probably my approach to that has changed over the years that I've been doing accessibility. So I think what I tend to focus on now, and in that kind of, that sort of leadership piece, and the, changing people's sort of the mindset about accessibility, is the fact that we've had some research recently that said, it was actually run by the Boston Consulting Group, one of our clients, and they actually did a survey of over 28,000 people across 16 countries, and that for me is really significant. How large this research was, the group that was asked this question. So the question was, do you have a disability or a health condition that impacts a major life activity? Now, most organizations think that's between about 4 and 7%. That's what they estimate. The results of this survey showed that actually it was around 25% of people who answered yes to that question. Now, if you frame accessibility as 25% or a potential 25% of your workforce not being able to access your learning content, for me that totally reframes it. That for me is an incalculable cost to businesses. It's a catastrophic situation to be in if you're not meeting a potential quarter of your staff, of your workforce, because of accessibility. I think the other main change in my approach now is, you very kindly were talking about the LPI award, and we've been shortlisted for the learning technologies. We've won a Brandon Hall award. So I think it's really important, and it's a key part of our strategy to be aligning accessible learning content with excellence. Because how can you say your learning content is excellent, in any shape or form, if you are not making sure that everybody has equal access to it? It's just, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's got to be part of how in L&D we see excellence, how we measure excellence, is in the first instance, can your people who you're creating this learning for actually access it? Because otherwise, all of the other work that you do on that learning content is potentially, doesn't mean anything if they can't actually access what you've created.
You see, listeners, we get all the top voices on this podcast, the award winners with all their amazing accolades. Congratulations. It
Thank
sounds like you
you.
guys are doing tremendous things. Okay, as much as we at the Learning Network try not to focus too much on AI, because several folks within the organization do feel like that's something that's being talked about perhaps a bit too much at the moment. Let's talk about AI for a moment.
Okay.
With AI and generative tools, Susie, now being built into learning platforms, what new opportunities or risks do you see when it comes to creating accessible learning experiences?
Yeah, I think that again comes very much back to how my own experience, because I think that's a really important part of my journey as well, is that I have seen how accessibility has absolutely transformed my own practice. And I've seen both the kind of, the limitations of making content, as in not the frustrations, I should say, rather than limitations of, it can be very time consuming, for example. So one of the huge benefits for me is the amount of the time that AI saves me. So since I've been working on making learning content accessible. At the beginning, I wouldn't have probably used AI for things like creating alternative text. And obviously, whenever you use AI, you need to have that human. You can't just let it go away. And some people do, but for me, you've got to make sure that you are, if it does generate alternative text, for example, that you're checking it is actually, the context is right, etc. But it actually helps me so much in the initial steps of doing things like creating alternative text. I was saying earlier that I'm dyslexic. I've also got dyscalculia, which means that kind of processing things like charts and graphs and trying to write alternative text for them, I find incredibly difficult. So having just that prompt from AI to do that, it saves me an incredible amount of time. Things, for example, like posting things on LinkedIn, even, sometimes in the past I wouldn't have posted something on LinkedIn with an image because it would have taken me such a long time to create the alternative text for that image. But now I can use AI to really, really speed that up. And that's been absolutely transformative, I think, for me. And the other thing I was experimenting with the other day, which was, I just wanted to shout about it to everyone, which is great why I could tell you, but I uploaded a captions file and a video file that I'd made to it was ChatGPT I was using, and asked it to create a transcript, a descriptive transcript. So to describe, that's one of the things that you need for people with vision access needs. So I asked it to create a transcript, not only with the dialogue that was what people were saying, but also to describe what was happening in the video. And it did a really, really good job. Again, I still had to tweak it, but again, probably saved me just hours and hours of work. So those are some of the, and that, I don't pretend to be an expert on AI, but those are the kind of tangible things that I found it really helpful with. I think obviously you said the threats as well. I think as everybody, is it being used ethically? It's certainly skewed from the point of view of people with disabilities, and kind of it's some of the things it says. And if you're asking it for kind of, I don't know, scenarios, for example, you can it's skewed. It's almost has a kind of an ableist opinion sometimes on people with disabilities. So that kind of thing, I think, is like for everything with AI. I think the only other thing for me from a personal view is obviously it's difficult to when I'm using it, that it's that kind of sustainability side of it, and its impact on the environment. And the only way that I can make myself feel any better about that is actually we've partnered with an organization that we plant a tree for every one of our programs or every one of our surveys that's been completed, which is a tiny thing, and I'm not, but it just makes me feel slightly better about the impact of using AI, just offsetting it.
I love that. There's a forest somewhere with your name on it. Okay, we are running out of time, so just one more question for you
Okay.
today.
Yeah.
And it's kind of reversing what we were talking about earlier in terms of getting buy-in from leadership. So this
Okay.
time around, for leaders who want to champion accessibility across their organization, what are the most effective ways to build awareness and shift culture among L&D teams?
Yeah, so that's a really great question to finish on, actually, because I think the what I've tended to focus on at the sort of start of my career was really making it accessibility practical to people like myself who are instructional designers. And that is wonderful, that idea of everyone having the power to do something in their own learning and make it as accessible as possible, even if maybe they don't have the support of their organization. So something that a term I used was quiet accessibilizing. So even if you don't have the support of your organization, you still have a lot of power, if you are an instructional designer, to make things as accessible. Find out as much as you can, make things as accessible as you can. But that leadership part, I think for me, that's where the change will really come in our in the sector, in L&D in general. And so leaders are so important, I think, to get that change across. And it as you mentioned, it really is a change in mindset. So I think it's that from a leadership point of view, someone being in a leadership role and being behind accessibility is huge, because that is you're kind of leading by example. We know that this isn't something, we're not just doing it because it's we're ticking a box, or it's a nice to have, or we think we should be doing it. We genuinely can see that this is absolutely critical for our learning strategy, and also for if we can align it with our business objectives. But I suppose the one thing for me that kind of comes back to that sort of leading by example is to change that mindset. It very often, and I see it all the time with organizations I work with, is it's almost like the accessibility light bulb goes off. It's what I call the accessibility spark. And that's when it finally makes sense. You realize how important it is, either because you've had experience of it yourself, or you've had, someone that you work with who you've seen has not had equal access to learning content. And it's that human spark. So we sometimes forget that leaders are human, that they are human. And if they can, yes, obviously all of the kind of business side of things, aligning it with business objectives, really important. But if they can be either kind of like share their experience, or they can explain why it is important to them, I think that makes such a difference to mindsets. It's that people being, I think it's the same with people much more aware of being of neurodivergence now, is people beginning to talk about that and be very honest about it. And I think it is that sharing experience, it's that kind of people's lived experiences and people's shared experiences. I think that will change the mindset, however important the business objectives and are. I think it's that common spark between us, and that kind of empathy, and that way of doing things that really kind of make us feel humanly connected to each other.
What a wonderful positive note to finish on. Susi Miller, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.